Hey, what's going on? JTS here, and I figured since I did the gentle art of making enemies, it would be a good idea to do the other text that, well, originally influenced me and introduced me into the concept of aesthetics, which is James Joyce's A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. I only even came across Joyce for, well, two primary reasons. When I was first trying to, read what else was meant to be what I thought was important, I looked up a list of 100 books, or the 100 best books, and Joyce had written both number 1 and number 3. 3 was Portrait, and the title really interested me. But the other thing is that I have the same birthday as Joyce, which, I don't know, I have the same birthday as Ayn Rand. That's part of the reason why I named my novel Atlas Winced, just for the whole shrugged bit, just as a kind of a reference towards her in a way. But let's just get right into it. I figure I'll show you the quotes that I found to be most important when I was 17. The spirit of quarrelsome comradeship, which he had observed lately in his rival, had not seduced Stephen from his habits of quiet obedience. He mistrusted the turbulence and doubted the sincerity of such comradeships, which seemed to him a sorry anticipation of manhood. The question of honor here raised was, like all such questions, trivial to him, while his mind had been pursuing its intangible phantom. Turning in his resolution from such pursuit, he had heard about him the constant voices of his father and of his masters, urging him to be a gentleman above all things and urging him to be a good Catholic above all things. These voices had now come to be hollow sounding in his ears. When the gymnasium had been opened, he had heard another voice urging him to be strong and manly and healthy, and when the movement towards national revival had begun to be felt in the college, yet another voice had bidden him to his true country, and to help to raise up her language and tradition. In the profane world, as he foresaw, a worldly voice would bid him raise up his father's fallen state by his labors, and, meanwhile, the voice of his school comrades urged him to be a decent fellow, to shield others from blame, or to beg them off, and to do the best to get free days for the school. And it was the din of all these hollow-sounding voices that made him halt irresolutely in the pursuit of phantoms. He gave them ear only for a time, but he was happy only when he was from them, beyond their call, alone in the company of phantasmal comrades. What did it avail to pray when he knew his soul lusted after its own destruction? His destiny was to be elusive of social or religious orders. The pride of that dim image brought back to his mind the dignity of the office he had refused. All through his boyhood he had mused upon that which he had so often thought to be his destiny, and when the moment had come for him to obey the call, he had turned aside, obeying a wayward instinct. Now time lay between. The oils of ordination would never anoint his body. He had refused. Why? Yes, those were noble names on the dusky flyleaf, and even for so poor as a Latinist as he, the dusky verses were as fragrant as though they had lain all those years in myrtle and lavender and vervain. But yet it wounded him to think that he would never be but a shy guest at the feast of the world's culture, and that the monkish learnings, in terms of which he was striving to forge out an aesthetic philosophy, was held no higher by the age he lived in than the subtle and curious jargons of heraldry and falconry. Keep your icon, if you must have a Jesus. Let us have a legitimate Jesus. No honorable and sincere man, said Stephen, has given up to you his life and his youth and his affection from the days of Tone to those of Parnell, but you sold him to the enemy, or failed him in need, or reviled him and left him for another, and you invite me to be one of you. I'd see you damned first. The soul was born, he said vaguely, first in those moments I told you of. It has a slow and dark birth. more mysterious than the birth of the body. When the soul of a man is born in this country, there are nets flung at it to hold it back from flight. You talk to me of nationality, language, religion. I shall try to fly by those nets. Pity is the feeling which arrests the mind in the presence of whatsoever is grave and constant in human sufferings and unites it with the human sufferer. Terror is the feeling which arrests the mind in presence of whatsoever is grave and constant in human sufferings and unites it with the secret cause. A girl got into a hansom a few days ago, he went on, in London. She was on her way to meet her mother, whom she had not seen for many years. At the corner of the street, the shaft of a lorry shivered the window of a hansom in the shape of a star. A long fine needle of the shattered glass pierced her heart. She died on the instant. The reporter called it a tragic death. It is not. It is remote from terror and pity according to the terms of my definitions. The tragic emotion, in fact, is a face looking two ways, towards terror and towards pity, both of which are phases of it. You see, I use the word arrest. I mean that the tragic emotion is static, or rather the dramatic emotion is. The feelings excited by improper art are kinetic, desire or loathing. Desire urges us to possess, to go to something. Loathing urges us to abandon, to go from something. The arts which excite them, pornographical or didactic, are therefore improper arts. The aesthetic emotion, I use the general term, is therefore static. The mind is arrested and raised above desire and loathing. Stephen said in a polite parenthesis, "We are all animals. I also am an animal." "But we are just now in a mental world," Stephen continued. The desire and loathing excited by improper aesthetic means are really not aesthetic emotions, not only because they are kinetic in character, but also because they are more than physical. Our flesh shrinks from what it dreads and responds to the stimulus of what it desires by a purely reflex action of the nervous system. Our eyelid closes before we are aware of the fly that is about to enter our eye. In the same way, said Stephen, your flesh responded to the stimulus of a naked statue, but it was, I say, simply a reflex action of the nerves. Beauty expressed by the artist cannot awaken in us an emotion which is kinetic, or a sensation which is purely physical. It awakens, or ought to awaken, or induces, or ought to induce, an aesthetic stasis, an ideal pity, or an ideal terror, a stasis called forth, prolonged, and at last dissolved by what I call the rhythm of beauty. Rhythm, said Stephen, is the formal aesthetic relation of part to part in any aesthetic whole, or of an aesthetic whole to its parts, or of any parts to the aesthetic whole of which it is a part. We are right, he said, and the others are wrong, to speak of these things and try to understand their nature, and having understood it, to try slowly and humbly and constantly to express, to press out again, from the gross earth, or what it brings forth, from sound and shape and color, which are the prison gates of our soul, an image of the beauty we have come to understand. That is art. One of my favorite quotes of all time. Art, said Stephen, is the human disposition of sensible or intelligible matter for an aesthetic end. You remember the pigs and forgot that. You are a distressing pair, you and Cranley. Aquinas, said Stephen, says that it is beautiful, the apprehension of which pleases. He uses the word visa, said Stephen, to covet aesthetic apprehensions of all kind, whether through the sight or hearing or through any other avenue of apprehension. This word, though it is vague, is clear enough to keep away good and evil, which excite desire and loathing. It means certainly a stasis, and not a kinesis. How about the true? It produces also a stasis of the mind. You would not write your name in pencil across the hypotenuse of a right-angled triangle. Plato. Static, therefore, said Stephen. Plato, I believe, said the beauty is the splendor of the truth. I don't think that it has a meaning, but the true and the beautiful are akin. Truth is beheld by the intellect, which is appeased by the most satisfying relations of the intelligible. Beauty is beheld by the imagination, which is appeased by the most satisfying relations of the sensible. The first step in the direction of truth is to understand the frame and scope of the intellect itself, to comprehend the act itself of intellection. Aristotle's entire system of philosophy rests upon his book of psychology, and that, I think, rests on his statement that the same attributes cannot at the same time and in the same connection belong to and not belong to the same subject. The first step in the direction of beauty is to understand the frame and scope of the imagination, to comprehend the act itself of aesthetic apprehension. Is that clear? Now, to finish what I was saying about beauty, said Stephen, the most satisfying relations of the sensible man must therefore correspond to the necessary phases of artistic apprehension. Find these and you find the qualities of universal beauty. Aquinas said, ad poetriam tria requentia integritas consonantia claritas. That was terrible. I translate it so. 3 things are needed for beauty: wholeness, harmony, and radiance. Do these correspond to the phases of apprehension? Are you following? In order to see that basket, said Stephen, your mind first of all separates the basket from the rest of the visible universe, which is not the basket. The first phase of apprehension is a bounding line drawn about the object to be apprehended. An aesthetic image is presented to us either in space or in time. What is audible is presented in time, what is visible is presented in space. But temporal or spatial, the aesthetic image is first luminously apprehended as self-bounded and self-contained upon the immeasurable background of space or time, which is not. You apprehended it as one thing. You can see it as one whole. You apprehended its wholeness. That is integritas. Then, said Stephen, you pass from point to point, led by its formal lines, and you apprehend it as it balanced part against part within its limits. You feel the rhythm of its structure. In other words, the synthesis of immediate perception is followed by the analysis of apprehension. Having first felt that it is one thing, you feel now that it is a thing. You apprehend it as complex, multiple, divisible, separable, made up of its parts, the result of its parts, and their sum, harmonious. That is consonantia. The connotation of the word, Stephen said, is rather vague. Aquinas uses a term which seems to be inexact. It baffled me for a long time. It would lead you to believe that he had in mind symbols or idealism, the supreme quality of being, of beauty being a light from some other world, the idea of which the matter was but the shadow, the reality of which it was but the symbol. I thought he might mean that claritas was the artistic discovery and representation of the divine purpose in anything, or a force of generalization which could make the aesthetic image a universal one, make it outside its proper conditions. But that is literary talk. I understand it so. When you have apprehended that basket as one thing, and you have analyzed it according to its form, and apprehended it as a thing, you make the only synthesis which is logically and aesthetically permissible. You see that it is that thing which it is, and no other thing, the radiance of which he speaks in the scholastic Kiditas, the whatness of a thing. This supreme quality is felt by the artist when the aesthetic image is first conceived in his imagination. The mind is that mysterious instant Shelley likened beautifully to a fading coal, the instant wherein that supreme quality of beauty, the clear radiance of the aesthetic image, is apprehended luminously by the mind which has been arrested by its wholeness and fascinated by its harmony, is the luminous, silent stasis of aesthetic pleasure, a spiritual state very like to that cardiac condition which the Italian physiologist Luigi Galvani uses a phrase almost as beautiful as Shelley's, called the enchantment of the heart. What I have said, he began again, refers to beauty in the wider sense of the word, in the sense that the word has the literary tradition. In the marketplace it has another sense. When we speak of beauty in the second sense of the term, our judgment is influenced, in the first place, by the art itself and by the form of that art. The image, it is clear, must be set between the mind or senses of the artist himself and the mind or senses of others. If you bear this in memory, you will see that the art necessarily divides itself into 3 forms, progressing from one to the next. These forms are the lyrical form, the form wherein the artist presents his image in immediate relation to himself. The epical form, the form wherein he presents his image in immediate relation to himself and to others. The dramatic form, the form wherein he presents his image in immediate relation to others. Lessing, said Stephen, should not have taken a group of statues to write of. The art, being inferior, does not present the forms I spoke of distinguished clearly one from another. Even in literature, the highest and most spiritual art, the forms are often confused. The lyrical form, and is in fact the simplest verbal vesture of an instant of emotion. A rhythmical cry, such as ages ago cheered on the man who pulled at it the oar or dragged stones up a slope. He who utters it is more conscious of the instant of emotion than of himself as feeling emotion. The simplest epical form is seen emerging out of the lyrical literature, when the artist prolongs and broods upon himself as the center of an epical event. And this form progresses till the center of emotional gravity is equidistance from the artist himself and from others. The narrative is no longer purely personal. The personality of the artist passes into the narration itself, flowing round and round the persons and the actions like a vital sea. This progress you will see easily in that old English ballad Turpin Hero, which begins in the first person and ends in the third. The dramatic form is reached when the vitality which has flowed and eddied round each person fills every person with such vital force that he or she assumes a proper and intangible aesthetic life. The personality of the artist, at first a cry or cadence or a mood and then a fluid and lambent narrative, finally refines itself out of existence and personalizes itself, so to speak. The aesthetic image in the dramatic forms is life purified in and reprojected from the human imagination. The mystery of aesthetic, like that of material creation, is accomplished. The artist, like the god of the creation, remains within or behind or beyond or above his handiwork, invisible, refined out of existence, indifferent, paring his fingernails. Above the flame, the smoke of praise goes up from ocean, rim to rim. Tell no more of enchanted days. I really love that line, the last one. Every jackass going the roads thinks he has ideas. Did the idea ever occur to you, Cranley asked, that Jesus was not what he pretended to be? The first person to whom that idea occurred, Stephen answered, was Jesus himself. I mean, Cranley said, hardening in his speech, did the idea ever occur to you that he was himself a conscious hypocrite, what he called the Jews of his time, a whited sepulchre, or to put it more plainly, that he was a blackguard? I imagine, Stephen said, that there is a malevolent reality behind those things I say I fear. The God of the Roman Catholics could do that now, Stephen said. I fear more than that the chemical accident which would be set up in my soul by a false homage to a symbol behind which are massed 20 centuries of authority and veneration. I said that I was lost, or I said that I had lost the faith, Stephen answered, but not that I had lost respect. What kind of liberation would that be? To forsake an absurdity which is logical and coherent, and to embrace one which is illogical and incoherent. What you said, is it, Cranley asked. Yes, I remember it, to discover the mode of life of art whereby your spirit expresses itself in unfettered freedom. Look here, Cranley, he said. You have asked me what I would do and what I would not do. I will tell you what I will do and what I will not do. I will not serve that in which I no longer believe, whether it call itself my home, my fatherland, or my church, and I will try to express myself in some mode of life or art as freely as I can and as wholly as I can, using for my defense the only arms I allow myself to use, silence, exile, and cunning. You made me confess the fears that I have, but I will tell you also what I do not fear. I do not fear to be alone, or to be spurned for another, or to leave whatever I have to leave, and I am not afraid to make a mistake, even a great mistake, a lifelong mistake, and perhaps as long as eternity too. Those are also some of my favorite quotes from here. This was a huge influence on me. The two characters I identified most with at this age were Stephen Daedalus from Portrait and Johnny the Savage, well, John the Savage from Brave New World. That's where my moniker comes from, if you didn't know. And it was a pretty close tie at the time. I really, really identified with Stephen because I too had lost faith at a pretty early age. I was 10 at the time, I think. And it just really, really hit me. There's only 5 chapters, and it's not really that long of a read, but it's something I think is worth it. Is it the 3rd best novel? Well, yeah, actually that's about what I have it ranked at, because Islands first, then Illuminatus, then It. So I guess even in my own system it's the 3rd best novel, so that's good. But it's been JTS, I've been talking long enough, hope you have a great day.